Yeah.
Music musing, opinion with
laden with
some facts.
Facts sprinkled over it.
Welcome to Music Musing. Every once in a while, my brother George and I would have these conversations about music. Music is our passion, and it's a huge part of our lives, and we decided to share those conversations with you. So if you love music, sit back and enjoy this podcast.
Okay, welcome back to Music Musing. Got my brother on the line.
How we doing?
Good. Moving into a new house, getting things set up, recording from the basement, all kind of weird stuff, and going off the cuff, as we love to do with our conversations.
Yes, exactly.
So I had a conversation with a friend a couple Friday nights ago, and he was quite distraught. He's a music buff as well. Quite distraught, listens to the show, comes in and goes, "Man, I just got an argument with a guy on Twitter." I'm like, "Okay, what's this about?" And he goes, "This guy was convinced and angry about the fact that Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was the most overrated rock album ever." And said it was definitive, that it was, that's it. There is no other. There's
argument.
No argument. It was now, and we always preface this podcast with it's our opinion.
Yeah.
And this one probably
There are
will.
some facts, though.
Yeah, there are some facts. And this one will also be our opinion
With some facts.
With some facts, which is kind of that just needs to be our new motto. Yeah. Music musing, opinion
laden with
some facts.
Facts sprinkled over it.
But it got me thinking, and it got us. Actually, we talked quite a bit about it that night as well, and you and I have even discussed it a little bit and said, hey, let's just save this for a conversation for online and talk about it, because if you look at the top, a couple lists I pulled, the top 10, top 50 rock albums of all times. We'll get into that in just a minute, but to say that Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is the most overrated rock album ever is, I guess in some people's minds it might fit. It might fit the criteria for being the most overrated.
I think it has to fit the criteria of being a rock album first. It's more of a concept album.
And that's exactly where I went initially with my conversation with my friend was, are we considering, Sgt. Pepper a rock album? And he's like, well, what do you mean? Do you consider it a rock album? I said, well, do you consider it, like in the same vein as Led Zeppelin 1 or Back in Black or, as much as I hate to say it, the Metallica Black Album? Are we talking about sales? Are we talking about, songs that are on it? Are we talking about concept? Are we talking about
Well, I think the overrated concept is purely opinion, and I think the rock. I mean, what we define as rock is more to the heavier side, obviously, because on our top 25 list, we went clear back to Elvis because he is, to using air quotes heavily, the king of rock and roll. Right. So, and the Beatles, and we went over with Pete Pardo that there's Tex-Mex rock, or I think it was Brent. We went over.
It was Brent, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a level of what defines rock, but again, most of the lists I read that I just Googled overrated rock albums of all time. Right. And there was a lot of similarities. They didn't skew there was some of them were 25, some of them were 10, some of them were, just a top 5 list, but they were mostly, and I say mostly, the same albums. And to deviate just a minute, I mean, the 10 I have are, there's a couple that were mainstays on those lists, but a few that I just think are overrated. So, well, I say list. I wrote down albums that I think are extremely overrated. So,
Well, and I think, in digging into that with my friend too, and I'll post all his information on the notes when we get to that. But the first thing that came up was, hey, it's a concept album. Hey, why are we discussing this? Because it is lighter on the lighter side. It's not on the heavier side when you consider rock albums. But if you look at the genre that it's in, Beatles technically at that time fell into the rock genre.
Sure.
And whether you agree with it or not, it's still what they put it on the shelf as. I don't think it. I think even Thriller is listed as rock, right? I mean, that's
maybe.
Yeah,
I think that's pop, though. I mean,
right, but so if you look at the sales side of it, though, you got Thriller up there as the most sales album ever. So
right.
I wouldn't consider Thriller in this conversation. I do consider Sgt. Pepper in this conversation, even though I kind of feel the same way you do, is I don't think it's classic rock or what we consider rock. Again, we're going kind of on our opinions.
It's like British Invasion pop.
Yeah.
Rock,
we kind of came around to the conversation, and I basically spent the rest of the night. I go to play cards on Friday nights with a bunch of younger guys and older guys, and this guy is kind of around our age, and it kind of bothered me the entire night. And him and I kind of went back and forth about it the entire night, and I think we kind of settled on the fact that I felt that if I was going to pick that type of album or an album that was acclaimed, that was filed under the rock category, I think I would have felt more comfortable with saying something like Bruce Springsteen's album.
Yes.
Would be more to what I would think would be an overrated album.
You said albums, right? I think Bruce Springsteen is overrated as a whole, let alone just one album.
And that's kind of how we discussed it as well. Was if you're going to pick somebody that I could think that always gets critical acclaim as a rock musician, and then we kind of went to the route of Billy Joel, and I think Billy Joel's even further removed from rock at that point. But so I'm just going to do a quick look at what if you do Google search of top 50 rock albums of all time. They don't put them in technically any order, but you got Dark Side of the Moon, the Beatles' White Album, Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd, Revolver by the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, Abbey Road, Nevermind by Nirvana.
Holy crap! I didn't get that. I didn't Google that list. I got a lot of different ones when mine come out.
Well, and this is just what streams across the top. Who's Next by the Who. The Wall by Pink Floyd, Aqualung, Jethro Tull, Are You Experienced, Jimi Hendrix, OK Computer by Radiohead, 2112 by Rush, Moving Pictures by Rush. There was a Stones one in there. Exile on Main Street, Stones.
Yeah.
The list goes on. Hotel California, Led Zeppelin 4, Velvet Underground, Back in Black. It's stuff that you typically Appetite for Destruction. I had to throw that one in there. But the
one that showed up on a lot of those lists, I'm sure it's on the list that kind of to me falls into the Sgt. Pepper category is A Night at the Opera by Queen.
So, but again, let's kind of determine what we're talking about here, because
right. I mean that's a Sgt. Pepper feel. It's more of a conceptual rock opera abomination. I'm not a huge fan of Queen. They're enormously talented as a band, but I never really I don't know. I think most of their popularity came in '93 when Wayne's World, when they were all headbanging in the Pacer to Bohemian Rhapsody. And that since that resurgence, it seems like they've carried a wave of popularity among people that don't know the difference between Sgt. Pepper and I don't know.
So hits off that album. What's the hits off that album?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay, what else?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, at the time, there wasn't too many hits on that album, and there's a couple good songs on it too. but you're right. It was more of a concept album. It was more of a, let's put together some really weird sounding, strange sounding songs and, and one amazingly operatic song that had a lot of different sounds to it and different,
Yeah.
way different from what rock was. But I mean, there were some harder rock songs on that as well. Wow. So, I mean, I definitely don't disagree with you. I think that in me looking at the list, I think there are a lot of other ones that I think are more overrated because when I think of Queen, I don't think of that album when I think of critical acclaim. I think of the one with Stone Cold Crazy and
right, but I think the whole we're talking about overrated albums. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody's on that one, and that's the one that gets. I mean, when most people think Queen, they think Bohemian Rhapsody, especially now.
Right.
I mean, and even having the movie, named that and everything, the biography of the band, so to speak, was named Bohemian Rhapsody. So I think that's why it showed up, especially now. But again, that falls more to the Sgt. Pepper side of, is it really rock? I know the end of that song, people consider, the headbanging moment or whatever, but never really understood Queen fully, and that song is one of those. It also falls in that if I never have to hear it played again, I'd be all right with that too. But
yeah,
but anyway,
and I think,
digress.
Well,
I'm not beating up Queen.
No, I don't. Again, I think I'm looking for. I think when I had this conversation, I think what I was looking for was the big ones. Like you can't say, as much as I would love to, you can't say Hotel California is an overrated album.
No,
you can't. You just can't make that statement.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you can say you hate the Eagles or you don't like the Eagles as much as you want, but you can never say that Hotel California is an overrated album. You can't say, Appetite for Destruction is an overrated album. There might be an overrated band. That album might be something that you hate, Pete Pardo and George Seibert.
but it's influential, and I recognize
it's
that.
not only influential, but it is rock. It is, and there are hits. There's 5 or 6 hits off that album.
No, it's undeniable. That part is. But I mean, I think that overrated part, that's some of your opinion has to play into the to that part of it. Like, if you don't like the band and you think, some of the you mentioned Guns N' Roses, which I considered the peak of and sort of the edge of hair metal. I mean, they started off as that. I mean, late 80s there was kind of their wheelhouse. So I mean, they have to be considered in that era, if not that genre.
Right.
And I have Open Up and Say Ah by Poison because as one of the most overrated albums ever, because there were a bunch of hits on it, but they're a mediocre party band, that.
Is that the second one or is that the first one?
I think it's the first one.
Is Cry Tough the first song on it?
I don't know I don't have the track listing in front of me, but I know most of their radio hits are on that album, as far as, Every Rose Has Its Thorn and Don't Need Nothing But a Good Time. I mean, but it's
the second one then.
It's trash. I mean, to me, it's way over. I mean, I don't even know how Poison got popular to begin with, but that album itself, I think, is 100% overrated.
Well, okay.
And it's hugely popular and sold a lot. And
I will agree with you 100% that album is overrated. I actually like the first album better anyways, but I would definitely say that album's overrated, but it had a lot of hits. So
right.
I think it's that distance between hits or notoriety and putting it on a pedestal. I mean, it's the distance between those two things that I think that I'm looking for. Like, I don't think there was enough notoriety of that album to make it overrated, because it had a couple hits. It was decent, but I don't think it gets as much notoriety as, say, Sticky Fingers by the Stones. You know,
Right.
you're talking about an album that people hold in high esteem, like
Right.
we talked about, or like, you know,
Like
Who's
Nevermind.
Next, or Nevermind, which Who's Next, something like that. The Wall, you know, the people that when you say Pink Floyd, you know, they're going to come with 3 albums. They're going to come with, you
Dark
know,
Side
The
of the
Wall,
Moon.
Dark Side of the Moon, and
Wish You Were Here.
Wish You Were Here. So, you know, those are critically acclaimed albums. And I think the distance between the acclamation that those get and what those albums brought either to rock or to hits or to sales is pretty close. I mean, whether you like Pink Floyd or not, Dark Side of the Moon is another one that I would never put on an overrated album list. I couldn't put that on there. Do I put Sgt. Pepper's on the most overrated album? I think it's kind of overrated. I kind of like it. I think it was a really nice change for the Beatles to move into something completely different from what they've been doing, the British Invasion bubblegum pop side. Yeah. And, you know, and to move from what they were doing into that was a great switch for them, and a really nice, you know, breakout feel for them. I might be a little overrated, but to be the most overrated seems a little harsh.
Well, the song the one that kept, and not to keep beating Sgt. Pepper, I know that's how the conversation started. I mean, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, there's some funky, some odd songs on there, and it was. I mean, I don't listen to the Beatles with any regularity. I like the Beatles, okay, but I'm not like an obsessed fan. I think that's due to my age and what's available since. But the one that was at the top of most of the lists, and I'm sure you know, was Dylan's Blonde on Blonde.
Yeah. And I actually even, the first one that came out of my mouth when I finally, you know, stopped reeling from the initial conversation with my friend was, you know, is it Blonde on Blonde? And
Yeah.
he's like, you know, I could make an argument for that. And so, but I, again, come back to, wow, do we really put that album
In a rock genre.
rock?
Yeah.
Folk rock? Tex-Mex?
Surf rock, maybe?
Surf rock? But
No,
so
I know. And that's what I said. So these lists that I looked up, I rolled my eyes at a lot of them. Most of the lists that I just Googled, I mean, that's the extent of my research. I didn't really get too deep because I wanted to just kind of put my feel into this like I do most of this stuff. Most of them they hated on Led Zeppelin. I mean, literally like 3 out of 4 Led Zeppelin albums are on most of the lists. They really hated Rush. 2112 was like I don't think it wasn't on any of the lists I looked at. I looked at probably 10 different sites on their take, and 2112 was on all of them, and a lot of other Rush albums were on there also, which I disagree with as far as overrated. I mean, they're
2112 is a pretty good album. I don't care what anybody says.
Right. So I mean, I disagree. The thing, like, I think we're getting down to the bones of it. You and I think, disagree more on their definition of rock than their definition of overrated.
Well, that's true. But I also find it interesting that you went and looked up the top overrated albums. I actually just went and looked at the top, 50 or 10, 100 album lists because, obviously we don't have our PhDs in music, but we've listened to a lot of music.
Right.
We wouldn't be having these conversations if we had very little knowledge of music or music history.
Right.
And, we wouldn't be going on with Pete Pardo and talking with Brent and stuff and getting on there and talking about stuff because we've lived a lot of it and we've also researched a lot of it. So I find it interesting that you went the one route and I went the other because I just wanted to see what people thought were the critically acclaimed albums,
Yeah.
and Blonde on Blonde obviously came up, but so did 2112. And I went, yeah, that's a pretty good album. I wouldn't say that's an overrated album. You don't, when you hear Rush, that's the one that's going to come up.
Yeah.
And
Well, Moving Pictures or whatever.
well, yeah, I guess. I mean, it depends on who you're talking to. You're talking to a diehard Rush fan. 2112 is probably going to come up. Casual is probably going to get Moving Pictures, but I think that neither one of those two are ever going to be considered overrated. I think even as a Rush fan, you could probably find yourself to not even put that in an overrated area.
Sure.
But I thought it was interesting that we both went kind of different directions on our research, and Blonde on Blonde did come up, and it was kind of the same feel for me too. So I think if we're eliminating stuff based off of rock or non-rock, if we're eliminating stuff that's never going to be considered, any person that cares about rock music isn't going to consider Dark Side of the Moon an overrated album. If you're doing that, you're just saying that to get a rise in somebody,
right?
So then where do we fall? What if we take all that stuff out of the equation? Are we gonna go Metallica Black or?
Yes, I was just gonna say I have some on my list. Metallica's Black album is on my list.
Oh, but as much as I hate that album and hate what it did to their sound and turning their career, obviously they've become extremely lucrative with their career.
Sure.
I don't think Overrated fits that album.
Yeah, I do.
But there is a lot of hits off that album.
But I think they sold out to make that hit. I think they dumbed that album down. That's why I think it's overrated, because it's not Metallica.
Okay, so I think it's slightly overrated, but man, to say it's the most overrated in history, I mean, but take that title and just say it out loud. Most overrated in history.
Rock album?
I don't know if Black fits the most overrated in history. I'm definitely not disagreeing with you that it is probably an overrated album.
Right.
Most ever, based off our criteria, it's probably in the running. What else you got? I mean, what other ones did you come up with? Because like I said, I found one for me. I have one that I think, and I'll put my argument out there, but what else you got on your list?
I know one guy that's going to hate me for it, but Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf.
That's pretty high on the list. It has one popular song?
That falls into the Sgt. Pepper or not.
True.
I think it's rock, but it is a concept album more or less, and I still have yet to figure out what.
Should we just take concepts out too? Like
maybe we might have to.
Yeah,
but
because The Wall's going to fall on the list for me. As much as I love The Wall, The Wall is a great album for me, but slightly overrated. But it's that's a really good
you'd have to
concept
take
album.
out like Tommy and
right.
And stuff
so
like that.
Let's take those out. So if you hit those on your list, just drop them off. But what else you got?
Nevermind by Nirvana. I think it's, as far as overrated of all time, it's probably a top 3-ish, but again, much like Appetite for Destruction, you can't deny the influence, but I think they picked them as the poster children because there was way better bands at the exact same time and way better music and way better things happening.
Soundgarden.
Exactly. Well, Pearl Jam, 10 is actually on my list also, but I just wrote overrated albums.
Okay.
And when you said of all time, that does change my view on some of these, because and I don't want to spend too much time beating up albums that are great albums or had a lot of hits on them either. Born in the U.S.A. by Bruce Springsteen is probably what I would go with as far as the most overrated album in history.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a close for me. That's a pretty close one. If I take out Blonde on Blonde because I really don't think it's rock enough.
Right.
Born to Run is definitely going to be considered rock in most people's minds.
To me, they're interchangeable. Born to Run or Born in the USA.
Or I'm sorry, Born in the USA, right?
No, I mean, he did have a Born to Run album also that was on the lists that I looked up. But I think Born in the USA is just, again, this falls into, I don't know how Bruce Springsteen got stayed popular for so long, or how he's considered the boss or whatever. I don't get it. I mean, and I don't even dislike some of his music, but that him and that album are probably, I would argue, are probably one of the most overrated, maybe the most overrated album in history.
So
Rock
we
album.
think that gets enough acclaim. I mean, if you say him,
Are you
say
serious?
his name, well, but I'm saying if you say his name, that is obviously one of the first albums that come up. That's going to come up when somebody says
that
it.
song pretty much sold him to a generation. I mean,
Yeah, but
in
he
the
did
80s.
make a lot of music before that.
Oh yeah, and since.
Yeah,
But I mean that album had a lot of hits off of it, really.
yeah, I did.
But
I would say
still
that
have yet to figure it out.
it does pop up on a lot of top 10 lists, and honestly, if we're talking about it, the difference between a top 10 list and a top 50 list is a big difference. I mean, if you're narrowing to top 10, there might actually be a song or an album in the top 50 that, like at 47, that would make the top 10 if you're gonna start weeding stuff out. So,
Right.
To see him in a lot of the top 10 lists of albums in general, it says something. It says something that people are considering that a really high.
Maybe we
accolades.
missed the bullseye. Maybe we should have been like overrated albums, or I mean overrated artists. Excuse me.
Well, and I think that's where I was going to go with this. Actually, was you mentioned Born in the USA, and I said Born to Run.
Right.
He's got a lot of albums that are critically acclaimed
And overrated.
and possibly overrated. But I think it is hard to disseminate the difference between, are we picking a person or a band, or are we picking an actual album? And I think that's where this person that I spoke with settled as well. Was, if you're talking, you're taking a sacred band who 99% of the people that listen to rock music are going to say, don't touch the Beatles, period.
Right.
And taking one of their albums and saying that it's the most overrated ever. So you still have to take the artist into consideration when you're talking about something like this.
That's what I said about Appetite for Destruction.
Right.
You can't deny the influence or whatever.
Or the hits off that one, because that one...
hits. Right.
Yeah. I mean...
Exactly.
So for me, I mean, I will tell you that I settled on a single album that I think is really the most overrated in rock history. And I'm not even holding back saying that. I will preface what my decision was based on the fact that I love this band. I think that everything, they've had magical moments in history, and they like you said, and spoiler alert, that you mentioned that they basically were the poster children for the grunge era. I really think Nevermind was one of the most overrated rock album in history.
I'm sure you can have arguments either way.
Yep, but Bleach was an amazing album. What they did for MTV Unplugged can never be topped. They started a genre. Well, they helped start a genre, but that album, as much as I love the songs on it, is extremely overrated. Some of those songs are very simple, very lowbrow, very dumb rock, for lack of better words. And they're messy. They're not well-formed songs. Some of them aren't very well-formed songs. And when you look at the difference between even Bleach, which was before it, has a lot better arrangements of songs. In Utero, and even the stuff they did on Unplugged are a lot better arranged songs. I think that album is extremely overrated and probably, my opinion, the most overrated album in rock history. And I love Nirvana.
And it's, again, everything, it's opinion driven and debatable. But I could certainly get on board because I'm not a super huge Nirvana fan. Again, I think that falls into what we've talked about before. I think timing set that album into the stratosphere amongst a lot of other I think a lot better albums that didn't get near the notoriety. And I think if Super Unknown or some of these other, or some other albums had gotten the
10.
Well,
10 got a pretty good, 10
10 got promoted in radio play, and so did Super Unknown really later on. But I think they picked Nirvana because Kurt was, although he claims he didn't want the fame or blah, 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 whatever, I think he was the poster child for that. He was the, hair in your face, chin on your chest.
Flannel shirt around your waist.
Flannel shirt, mopey, woe is me, I hate the world, I don't want to be famous. He was the poster. He was exactly what they wanted because Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and
Screaming Trees, Alice in Chains, pick 'em.
But they were still long-haired metal guys.
Yeah, right.
And even Grohl and Novoselic were in the background, but they were long-haired and they were, they were still metal guys.
Yeah.
Cobain was trying to, turn that into a melodic, emo feel metal and I think they just went with him because he was what they wanted to showcase, because the difference between the way, I can't even think of his
who
the front man for Nirvana,
Kurt Cobain.
Kurt Cobain. Holy moly, brain fart.
Yeah, I'll let that one go. We'll let that one slide.
The way he looked versus the way Chris Cornell looked at the time versus the way Eddie Vedder looked at the time, it was a huge difference.
Yeah.
They had flannel on or whatever, speaking of the other artists, but Cobain was that, he had the mop haircut. He was sort of reminiscent of the Beatles, only blonde, and just really, really self-absorbed and self-loathing, and that's really, I think, really what they want to promote. So I think it was the timing and it was a look thing as far as that goes. And the album is, it's got a radio hit that, it's back to, we don't even know what he's saying, something about a mosquito and his libido. Let's go with that, and I think they really I think it was more of a timing thing.
Well, I think one of the main reasons I also picked it was, we kind of discussed this a little bit earlier. If you talk about the level of critical acclaim that an album got, and again, we're taking musicians or acts out of it. If you look at the level of acclaim that an album's got,
sure,
albums like Blonde on Blonde or albums like Sgt. Pepper got a decent amount of critical acclaim. I'm not going to say that, but those are kind of critical acclaim in their area. So when you say Rush and you say 2112, people's like, yeah, that's it. If you say Queen, what comes out? Night at the Opera. Okay, right. But if you say grunge,
yeah, you think Nevermind.
Nevermind is that
you see that blue album cover with a naked baby chasing a dollar bill on it.
Exactly. I mean, you don't. It shaped an entire change in music history.
Absolutely.
And it's not. That's why I think
it's horrible.
It's not okay. Now you're in opinions.
No. It's
now
not
I'm going to turn your mic off.
But it is definitely overrated. That's a simple word.
And I think that's where I went with it. I really had to take personal feelings towards the band and the music out because again, sure. I actually enjoy putting that album on and listening to it. But when I listened to it, and like you said, you put it up next to the things that were out at that time, Super Unknown, you can listen to that album. That album has a lot of stuff that people missed off that album. It still had a lot of hits, but a lot of stuff that people missed on that album.
Yeah.
But to take it into rock history and look back at those old albums, like, ones that you'll never consider, like the Eagles, Hotel California and Back in Black, you'll never consider those to be overrated.
Okay, but you just said something that was a trigger for me. If you're going back through rock history, then Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles are considered rock legends. That has to be considered then, because if that's a strike against them, and their whole 70-year work of, well, not 60-year work of work, there has to be a level of, hey man, okay, so is that Nirvana had what, 3-4 albums and an Unplugged?
Yeah.
The Beatles have how many?
Yeah. I'm not taking away the fact that, if we eliminate them because of concept, right? But if we're putting them back in based on their breadth of work, I'm not saying that Sgt. Pepper's not an overrated band or overrated album.
Sure.
I certainly say that. And in fact, if you look at, bands who have a whole group of albums, if you look at Led Zeppelin, I would say that Physical Graffiti for me is overrated. I don't like, there's very few songs that, isn't Kashmir might be on that one, but, who wants to listen to 9 minutes of a slow beat? It's kind of background music for me. But yes, I think it's overrated. Do I think it's the most overrated in history? Am I going to put a pin down on that single album? No. Am I going to put a pin down on Sgt. Pepper? No. I'm going to say that it's definitely an overrated album. Right. But I'm not going to say that that's the number one overrated rock album of history, all the way back to Elvis, all the way up till now. You can even consider, take some albums that are out now that are rock, or let's say in the last 20 years.
Dookie.
Yeah, I think it's overrated. I think Kerplunk's a better album, anyways. But
see,
I don't think it's the most.
Well, I think that's where I think that's where we differ, because I think every band that is, using air quotes again, popular, has an overrated album.
Agreed.
Is that something that could be discussed? Because we could probably do another episode on that alone. That I think there is most bands, whether it's Sophomore Slump or the Black Album, I think they have an overrated album.
Agreed. I'm not going to argue with that. I think coming into this conversation, I did want to kind of land on a single album for myself, because
okay, then I'm going with Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. Is the most overrated album in rock history.
Right, and I do think, and there's merit. It was in my top 5. Trust me, that was there. Yeah. I think before we eliminated Stuff Blonde on Blonde was in my top 5 as well.
Sure.
Of overrated albums. But I think if we pull that out, because it's technically folk, if we're talking traditional rock, I think that Bruce sways enough into what we call rock to be considered as definitely, 1, 2, 3 on the list.
Well, if you listen to the song of the same name, Born in the USA, that's a rock song.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is an anthem. It's not
Dancing in the Dark, okay, it's pop rock. But I've yet to figure out A, the appeal with Bruce Springsteen, but B, that album, how it got so much critical acclaim and so much radio play and so much popularity. And I think that's,
I would say,
because like you said, if we're taking out concept albums and, softer rock, or singer-songwriters or whatever, if we're taking Dylan out, we're taking the Beatles out because they get a pass, or for their concept albums and The Wall and The Who and so on and so forth, I think it's, it would be a coin flip for me, and I could definitely get on board the Nirvana as far as, but see that, is that considered rock? Is it considered grunge? You could have that argument about any one of these albums, any one of these artists. As far as just basic rock and roll is considered, Nirvana, you wouldn't have to twist my arm to vote for Nirvana, but if they weren't on the list and Born in the USA was, I would vote for it. So,
yeah, and I think that's kind of what we've kind of narrowed it down to, is I think that you have to pull stuff out, because we're talking about true rock. You also
Right.
have to, measure the distance between the acclaim and what it really did. Then you also have to measure the distance between the album and the group or the singer-songwriter or the musician itself, because I'm not saying that there is a formula that you need to do here, that you need to, A plus B equals C type thing. But
Right,
you do
but
have to take some things into consideration.
Right. And we, like I said, and especially in this podcast, lean towards the rock or the heavier side. So if your friend was talking about, most overrated albums of all time, Sgt. Pepper would have to be, it would have to be a strong mention. It'd have a strong showing in a list of, I mean, think about how many albums are made and, just the ones we know of.
Right.
But as far as based on popularity, based on, if you're considering the Beatles rock and roll, it would have to have a strong showing. I think for us to say that the Beatles are rock and roll and that's the most overrated rock album of all time, I would pass on that. I would definitely fall towards Nirvana or Bruce Springsteen. And I'm telling you, Metallica's Black Album, I think is heavily overrated.
You, huh?
Yeah, it is. I just, because liking the band and what they've done and what they've done before and since, and they've done some really crappy stuff since even, but it didn't get the acclaim that the Black Album does. And I think maybe it's overplay some for me, but I do think it'd have to be mentioned for a lot of people, because a lot of people see that as the break point in good Metallica and not so good Metallica. So I think that would have to. They got a lot of acclaim, a lot of radio play, a lot of hits off, or a lot of songs played off that album, and I think it's pretty well overrated. But.
Yeah, I agree. So, half parting shot.
All right, I'm listening.
Halfway parting shot. So this actually made the list of a lot of the most popular albums. And I wanted to see, what the overrated rating is on this album. So
my overrated rating?
Yeah. Well, no.
Okay.
Well, okay. So this is why it's going to be a parting shot, because you have to do what we did. We have to take like the
take my feelings out of it.
Well, you have to take the history out of it. You have to take So Boston.
Oh.
There's that sound. God, I love that.
We started this podcast with that being the best album ever.
I didn't say it wasn't. Look, again, I don't think Nevermind is a bad album. I think it's the most overrated album based on a couple criteria that we've kind of narrowed it down to.
All right, so is it just a jab at me, or just to see what my take on it is?
It's an honest, look, you know me.
Yeah.
And we've done this podcast for a while, and a lot of people kind of are getting the feel of what we do and don't like.
Right.
I love Nirvana. And for me to set that aside and go, I honestly think Nevermind is the most overrated album in rock history. Take that attitude and just look at it as a from the outside. I honestly don't think so. I think that it doesn't get as much critical acclaim as it should. I think it gets a little bit. It definitely was in a time where there were a lot of corporate rock bands that had a lot of hits. So it kind of got muddled in with a lot of stuff. So it didn't get a lot of critical acclaim. So I think the distance between the actual album performance and the critical acclaim it got wasn't really far enough to make it that overrated. But I just wanted to see what your feeling was.
Even taking my personal opinion of the band and especially that album out of it, I don't think that's overrated. I think Journey would be.
Oh yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think. Now, like if you said Third Stage or one of those, I mean that Boston. But see, that's where it's tough for me. I don't think Boston got a lot of critical acclaim. I mean,
exactly.
They had a lot of hits and a lot of radio play, but I mean, so did Bad Company, so did Journey, so did Foreigner, so did whatever corporate rock. Pick one. I don't think Boston's first album was overrated by any means. But I think there were a lot of corporate rock bands that got a lot of play that do have overrated albums.
Yeah, I think that's another timing thing. I think if that album had come out, 5 years shifted one way or the other, it might have been one of the most overrated, or it might have been one of the most underrated. Like we might have actually moved the dial from one end to the other on that album. You put it 5 years forward, 5 years back.
Maybe, but that album, I mean, as far as radio hits or radio play, I mean, I guarantee you could pick any track off Boston's.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
And you've heard it on the radio,
right? But that's what I'm saying.
Especially,
but you don't hear it all the time like you do Guns N' Roses and AC/DC, and much as I love AC/DC,
Journey,
but you don't, and Journey, you don't hear it as much. And when you hear it, you're like, that's a great song. Right. So I agree. I think that again, it was a parting shot because I wanted you to pull what we talked about with all this other stuff into that and see how you felt. But I agree.
Well, I have one almost identical to that for you.
Oh no, you're not allowed to do a parting shot back to me, are you?
Well, it's not really a parting shot. It's just, it wasn't on any list, but it's on mine.
Okay.
And it falls in. I'll preface it with, it falls into that category of, I think all bands have that.
That one
overrated
album. Yeah.
Back in Black by AC/DC.
Yeah. I would definitely say I agree with you 100% that it's their most overrated album.
Yeah.
I find 2 songs off that album good. The rest of them are not even close to something that I like, even from AC/DC.
Well, it always struck me as, it's the resurgence. They're back. It's Brian Johnson. And it was this epic. I think some of their other albums with Brian Johnson were very much better and a lot better. And I don't think that initial release with Brian Johnson was this epic. I think that I consider that album kind of overrated. I wouldn't say overrated of all time, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of great music on that album, but I just kind of, it's funny that you said Boston, because I was kind of folding that Back in Black back because of our preferences and just to get your take on it.
I think honestly, this comes back to what we initially talked about too, about do we take sales out of it, because obviously it's in the top 5 sales ever.
No.
But I also think it's off of one song on the. I think that's Night of the Opera for AC/DC.
Oh, exactly. But AC/DC is a hell of a lot more rock and roll than Queen,
right?
I think.
Exactly, and a lot of their Bon Scott albums are going to be better albums
for
all
me.
around.
It's no contest.
So it was on my list. It was probably in my top 10. Honestly, to be 100% honest with you, Back in Black was on the top 10 of my list because there's only 2 songs on there that if it comes on the radio, if it's not one of those 2 songs, I will actually turn it off.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of a lot of the songs on there, and it does but I think the critical acclaim from that album comes from sales, and I think that sales come from,
and I think it was
All Night Long.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was also based on, like you said, the resurgence
right?
Of they're back, and this guy doesn't suck, and Brian, it was a triumphant return type of feel, but
yeah.
But and in that same vein, I'm going to say that Boston's self-titled debut album was not on my list anywhere. So,
well, it's interesting too because, like I said, when I look at the top 50 rock albums or the top 10 rock albums, Back in Black actually doesn't show up until really far down. So
really?
I think that if when we look at sales, we look at it being a really high runner.
Yeah.
When we look at acclaim, it was. Like you said, it was set in its time, and it had a lot of people following it because of hey, they're back,
right?
So I think that the distance between the critical acclaim and what's on that album, for the time in history, is definitely not as far as I would feel that Nirvana was. So yeah, I can step back far enough to say that it definitely was an overrated album for AC/DC, highly, probably their most.
Right. Fair enough.
So we'll call it a day, and we'll get this out there. And we've got some possible guests coming up. I think we're going to be back on Brent's show again. He's already chomping at the bit, and we got a couple more what ifs coming from Pete Pardo's cotranquility.org as well. So I think we're kind of floating around in different places right now. So kind of look for us. I'll put some links in the notes for that too. So
yeah, there's all of that stuff. The music musing feedback at gmail.com. Hit us up for ideas or questions, comments, any of that stuff. Yep. We have been on Crowdcast with Brent. Please say his last name, brother.
Schlinker,
Brett Schlinker. He does is it daily that he does that?
It used to be. It's kind of 3 times a weekish now, but it's a learning development podcast that he normally, or a live cast that he normally does.
We had a great time with that. You can catch the replay of that on there's a link in the podcast. There seaoftranquility.org, or there's a YouTube channel, Sea of Tranquility, with Pete Pardo. We did a couple episodes with him. Yeah, great stuff, great fun. We talked about what if grunge never happened, and we talked about
speaking of
yeah, exactly, and we talked about covers that are better than the original. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. We're talking about guesting on both of those again, and maybe periodically. We've got a number of podcasts. We still got good stuff lined up here, and
we do.
There is a link in the Instagram bio, Music Musing. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's all the social media giants, and Libsyn.com, right?
It's musicmusing.libsyn.com.
Musicmusing.libsyn.com. You can you can spread out from there.
Just in general though, I mean, I'm not gonna continue beating this horse, but go talk to your friends about music. I mean, we love to have the input, but we also want you to talk about it. I mean, this is why we do this, is we love talking about music. If it spurs you on to go out, with your friends and have the same conversation, do it. Go out and, sit down for half an hour over a beer and talk about what you think the most overrated album in rock history is. We don't want you to just, I love the fact that people listen to our podcast and give us comments and talk to us about it. But, we just want everyone to talk about rock and music in general. So, go out and do that. Go out and have fun with it.
Absolutely.
And we will catch up in a couple of weeks and do it again.
Absolutely. Always a good time.
Thanks for your time, brother.
All right. No problem.
Talk to you later.
See ya.
We want to talk to you about music, so reach out to us at musicmusingfeedback@gmail.com.
You can also find us on most social media sites by searching Music Musing or George or Craig Seibert, Sybert.
And you can also find us on Twitter as musicmusing_ as well.
Thank you for listening to this Music Musing podcast.